Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. The province announced that it is teaming up with the Alberta Medical Association to help with COVID-19 vaccine distribution. Lethbridge MP Rachel Hodder speaks out about her disappointment with the Liberals when it comes to making the vaccine more readily available to Albertans. And in light of recent house fires in our city, Lethbridge Fire Prevention Officer Troy Hicks has some tips on how to best protect yourself and your home from avoidable dangers.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. As part of the province's Phase 1 Path Forward relaunch plan on February the 8th, the City of Lethbridge says it will be keeping all recreation and culture facilities closed for now. That will include all public pools and arenas. Starting on Monday, however, one-on-one training will be allowed in places like the ATB Centre and the NMAC Centre. Lethbridge Recreation and Culture Manager Robin Harper says they're working with various sporting groups to help them adjust to the change.
Minor hockey is one of our largest user, if not the largest user. So we're working with them. Figure skating we've been working with. We've had some conversations with speed skating, as well as some of our private large users, those ones that offer training opportunities or work with kids outside of those those major non-profit or community groups. So yeah, we have a number of groups that we've been working with, trying to accommodate and provide space for their programming.
Residents are being asked to reach out to other city facilities like the Cor Van Ray YMCA, the Helen Schuler Nature Centre, and CASA if they have specific questions about the relaunch. Alberta gym owners are angry. They want the province to further ease pandemic restrictions so that they may fully reopen. The president of the Fitness Industry Council of Canada, Alberta Coalition, says the government missed the mark when it comes to reopening plans. Scott Wildman says simply allowing one-on-one personal training and by appointment only is not enough. Wildman says that he wants to have more people access their facilities. He believes they can do so safely, and that's their focus right now. He says if gyms are not allowed to fully reopen soon, it would be, quote, pretty catastrophic. Now, as mentioned, Alberta's planned Stage 1 reopening is set to take place on Monday. If virus cases continue on a downward trend, the Alberta government said the Stage 2 reopening would take place on March the 1st. Participants across Alberta will join in a free online self-defense course taught by a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu instructor tomorrow morning. As Micah Quinn explains, the instructor wanted to start these classes as a way of protecting those who felt most vulnerable.
Diana Trang calls Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu a lifestyle choice and what she tries to base her own life around. Trang is holding a free Zoom self-defense seminar on February 6th, and the reason she wanted to do this was in light of recent assaults on women and girls in Calgary.
As long as it continues to be a problem, I believe that we need to be doing this, and that the community deserves to have it as a skill that they should be able to have access to.
Trang says that she will be teaching the fundamentals of self-defense during the seminar.
How to stand up, how to hold yourself as you stand, so that if somebody was trying to take you down, pushing you, grabbing your hair, grabbing your shirt, grabbing your arm, that you're able to keep a good base. I call it a base. We call it base. So how you hold your legs, how you hold your posture, how you hold your spine, that kind of thing. How to fall safely if you did fall. How to get up safely, mindfully. All of those things. Sounds really simple, but to be honest, most people don't know how to do these things naturally.
So far, there are 900 people who have signed up for the event.
So the fact that I can hold a 2-hour seminar and actually be able to reach 900 people that could be across Canada, all over Alberta, I think that's amazing. It's an incredible opportunity.
Trang says that even though it is a free seminar, people can still donate any amount of money they can to a charity of her choice. And if people are interested in registering, they can visit the Satori Wellness Studio website for more information. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
The province announced that it will be teaming up with the Alberta Medical Association to vaccinate Albertans. Health Minister Tyler Shandro stressed the importance of the partnership with the 11,000 physicians in our province to get as many vaccines into the arms of Albertans as possible. In a statement earlier today, Health Minister Shandro had this to say: The Government of Alberta and the AMA will work together to examine opportunities to incorporate a role for community physician offices that are able to participate in the vaccine deployment plan when more vaccine becomes readily available for distribution. Alberta now has 68 variant cases of COVID-19. Dr. Dean Henshaw says 2 of the new cases have potentially exposed 2 Calgary school zones. Earlier, possible exposures were reported in 2 other Calgary schools, but Henshaw says so far no spread has been detected. Health officials say the variant strains are more contagious than the original. BC's provincial health officer says she's going to extend the COVID-19 restrictions in her province. Dr. Bonnie Henry says 28 cases of new variants of concern have been identified in British Columbia.
I am keeping the current province-wide public health orders on gathering and events in place. I will be continually reviewing and reconsider the need for these restrictions based on the incidence and prevalence of the virus, the data that we've shown today, any new information about transmission, and the progress of our vaccination supply and our immunization program. Right now, we need to stay the path. We need to buy time.
Major General Danny Fortin says he knows that provinces and territories need clear information about which shipments of COVID-19 vaccines are coming and when. But he says Moderna, one of Canada's 2 current suppliers, has not given the federal government precise numbers on upcoming deliveries.
At this time, we're able to share what we know in terms of Pfizer doses. We're receiving indications of what we expect to receive in March. We're still processing this information, and we'll be in the first week of March, and we'll be soon able to share that with provinces in confidence so that they can plan accordingly. We do not have visibility at this time on the next shipments of Moderna product. So that is a real limitation in the short term. Completely understand that it's making it more difficult for provinces to prepare clinics and prepare the vaccine distribution sites.
Now, when it comes to the lack of a COVID-19 vaccine for Canadians, Lethbridge MP Rachel Harder says it boils down to incompetence in Ottawa.
There's no doubt about it. This was due to poor planning from the current government. Unfortunately, they decided to put all of their eggs in one basket, and they failed to secure the type of contracts that they needed. And so as a result, Canadians are left on the hook. They're the ones that are feeling the repercussions of the inaction from the current government.
Catch the full interview with Lethbridge MP Rachel Harder, who will also give us her thoughts if she thinks an election will be called this spring. That's coming up later in our broadcast. Stats Canada says the economy lost around 213,000 jobs in January as employment fell to its lowest level since last August. The unemployment rate increased from 8.8 to 9.4%. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says he will continue with supports for families until the middle of this year.
The January job numbers are difficult for families across the country who lost their jobs. We knew that the further lockdowns that provinces had to take to get the numbers down, which we're seeing right across the country, the numbers are heading in the right direction. But we're not at the end yet. We know we're going to have to continue to hang in there. But that's why from the very beginning, the federal government worked hard to make those difficult decisions by the provinces a little bit easier by being there to directly support workers who are laid off because of COVID-19. First with the CERB, now with enhanced EI.
The federal Conservatives want the Liberals to take immediate action to prevent further job losses in our country.
Conservatives have been calling for the use of rapid testing to help people identify quickly whether or not they have COVID. If they do, they can self-isolate. If they don't, they can go on contributing to our economy and helping their fellow citizens. We don't know why Trudeau's been so slow in approving rapid tests, but certainly our jobs and our economy have suffered as a result of his delays. There have been roughly $20 billion of energy projects that await approval. They should immediately action decisions on those private sector funded jobs that are naturally physically distanced and that could get tens of thousands of people to work almost immediately. These are shovel-ready projects. Approve the projects now.
Since the COVID-19 pandemic began, the Canadian Centre for Child Protection has seen an 89% increase in reports of intimate images being shared against the will of young people under the age of 18. The agency says they work in conjunction with local law enforcement to help the families impacted and pursue criminal charges.
taken the report and we facilitate, if what we're dealing with is potentially illegal, the report, then we would forward that to the local agency who would have the jurisdiction over determining whether an investigation ensues or not. What we also do is help reduce the availability of that content online. We do that from CyberTip. So that's separate than the law enforcement side. We manage the availability of the content. And then we also work on the side of helping support individuals through managing if there's some emotional support needed, because there is a significant impact on individuals in these cases.
Now, if you have a child who has an intimate image surfacing online, you can get help and more information at cybertip.ca/intimate images. With the winter weather in full swing, monitoring fire hazards in our homes has become a top priority. Troy Hicks is the fire prevention officer for the City of Lethbridge, the Fire and Emergency Services, and he says there are simple ways you can protect yourself in your home as you spend more time inside.
People either using space heaters or possibly even electric heaters to warm up different parts of their house a little bit warmer. They need to be careful about the location of these, that they're using proper power bars, or at the very least, the cord of the heater is plugged directly into the wall. If the heater's old or frayed or all that, we'll remind them to, it's time to replace it. And then to protect themselves is just going to be reminding, maybe always make sure you have a charged and working fire extinguisher in your home, making sure you have proper smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors, and then reminding people not to be, throwing mittens and gloves and stuff on top of the heat registers and things like this to dry. You need to be careful with that and just keep stuff safe, and then make sure, like I said, with the working detectors, and make sure their exits are always clear and they always have a way out.
Hicks says if you have a natural gas or wood-burning fireplace, to make sure it's cleaned and inspected each and every year. Lethbridge police have arrested a couple of drug dealers following a bust on the city's south side. On Thursday, police executed a search warrant at a home in the 3300 block of 5A Avenue South and seized more than $135,000 worth of drugs. The drug bust included LSD, hashish, $20,000 worth of THC edibles, and over 9,200 grams of dried marijuana. 48-year-old Sandy Smith and 46-year-old Terry Smith, both of Lethbridge, face drug possession and trafficking charges and will appear in court on March 26th. Calgary police assault victim Dahlia Coffey, who was seen on video being thrown viciously to the floor by an officer in 2017, spoke to reporters after arguments on her assailant's sentencing.
Part of what just went on up there was an apology. I know it wasn't from Alex Dunn himself, but from his lawyer. Did that mean anything to you? What was that like to hear?
No, it didn't mean anything to me because it didn't really feel like a real apology. I was expecting it to come from him, not from his lawyer. Because it actually means a lot coming from the person that did it than coming from someone else. Because his lawyer looks like the third party who's passing on the message, instead of him saying it himself. Because Alex was the one that assaulted me, so at least I'll know that he actually means something and he meant to apologize, like it's coming from the bottom of his heart. A part of me wanted to yell at him or swear, but I know I couldn't do that, so every time I see his face, I kept on looking down.
Constable Alex Dunn expressed remorse and told Coffey that he did not intend to cause her physical and psychological pain. The Crown is asking for a 9-month jail sentence, and the defense is looking for a conditional sentence of 30 to 45 days. A former judge released her final report on anti-Indigenous racism in BC's healthcare system. The report found that Indigenous people feel unsafe in healthcare settings and experience worse health outcomes than non-Indigenous people.
The inadequacy at this time of BC's primary care system is evident. There's a high burden of disease amongst Indigenous peoples in British Columbia, and First Nations people in particular of all ages have comparatively lower attachment rates to GPs, general practitioners, and nurse practitioners. And in particular, when we look at that very vulnerable population of Indigenous people and First Nations people 65 years and older, who often need the most routine care, these elders are not attached to primary care at a rate 89% higher than non-First Nations people in British Columbia. And that, in fact, is quite a staggering finding of this data report.
The Saskatchewan Union of Nurses wants provincial leaders to explain how they plan to deal with a more infectious strain of COVID-19 following a report of a third variant case. The Ministry of Health says a person in the Saskatoon area tested positive for the United Kingdom variant. The The first 2 variant infections were first reported in Regina on Tuesday and are believed now to be contained. Union President Tracy Zambary says the province needs to be more vigilant and transparent about such variants and how people should protect themselves. Manitoba's health minister says his province is moving on all recommendations in a report on how COVID-19 was able to rapidly spread during a deadly outbreak at a personal care home. The report says 56 residents of the Maples Personal Care Home in Winnipeg died during the outbreak that was declared on October the 20th. It lasted until January the 12th. It says 74 staff and 157 residents tested positive for the novel coronavirus. The report says a significant loss of staff over a short period of time contributed to the rapid spread of the virus. The Holy Bible is not just a book of inspiration featuring God's powerful words, but is also historically accurate, according to Craig Evans. Dr. Evans is a professor of Christian origins at Houston Baptist University. He says when it comes to the reliability of the books in the Bible, oftentimes they're backed up by archaeologists.
Were they telling us what the historical Jesus really said and did, or are they just making up stories about him? Well, for me, the bottom line is archaeology. And I know plenty of archaeologists. I've done archaeological work in Israel myself. And if the Gospels were fanciful, if they were fiction, then they wouldn't be of any use for an archaeologist. But archaeologists, some of them are not Christians. Some of them don't necessarily believe in God, but they make use of Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and the book of Acts all the time when they're digging in Israel.
Catch the full interview with Professor Craig Evans and Jeanette Rocher discussing the reliability of the Bible. That's coming up after business news. It was another cold and snowy day in southwestern Alberta. Make sure you have a solid battery and a block heater because the mercury will be dropping even further. Full weather details are coming up. I know it's February and we shouldn't be surprised to see the colder temperatures and snow, but we still don't have to like it, do we? Although Mom used to say, son, you should really embrace winter. Jeanette Rocher is here now with a look at the weather picture. Jeanette, will we see a reprieve anytime soon?
Well, I wish I could tell you yes, Hal, but unfortunately we are in for a nasty week of brutal cold, wind chill values, and even risks of frostbite, including into tonight. We could see a risk of frostbite tonight, a little bit more snow expected this evening, into tomorrow, Saturday. 5 more centimeters of snow expected. Minus 18 is the high, but you know what? With the wind chill value, it's going to feel more like minus 24 tomorrow. There is also a risk of frostbite on Saturday. Into Sunday, our high temperature, minus 24. It's going to feel colder than that with wind chill. Mainly overcast skies, actually also for Sunday and Monday. Minus 23 the high for Monday. Minus 22 for Tuesday. Are we seeing a trend here? Finally, the sun is going to come out Tuesday and Wednesday, but still pretty cold. Minus 14 expected for Wednesday, and then climbing to minus 8 for Thursday. So we are in a very major cold snap right now. We're certainly outside of these values, which is our seasonal average for this time of year. Average lows minus 12. We're certainly getting way lower than that these days. 0 is our average high. 18 was our high temperature back in 1984. Would that be nice? Minus 34 was our chilliest day back in 1975. Sun rose this morning just before 8 a.m. right at 7:58, and our sunset tonight 5:33 p.m. So days are getting longer, but colder, unfortunately. So on the west coast tomorrow, Victoria, 12 degrees, periods of rain ending in the morning. 8 degrees in Vancouver, periods of rain also ending in the morning. Windy near the water over in Edmonton, minus 23 the high, minus 20 the high for Calgary. More snow is also expected tomorrow in Calgary. Now there is an Arctic ridge of high pressure bringing in a massive cold air mass across southern and central Saskatchewan, including Saskatoon and Regina. These cities are going to be experiencing extreme cold, risk of frostbite. What can I tell you? It's definitely winter on the prairies. Minus 5 the high in Toronto with a chance of snow. Sunshine in Ottawa, minus 6 is the high, minus 5 over in Montreal. Not a bad day there, mix of sun and cloud. Over in Atlantic Canada, Fredericton and Halifax experiencing periods of snow and rain. 2 degrees the high for Fredericton, 6 for Halifax, 5 for Charlottetown, also expecting some rain and fog. Rain and fog also expected tomorrow in St. John's, Newfoundland with a high of 3 degrees. So there you go, that is your forecast. Up next is our ski report.
Castle Mountain has seen 39 centimeters of snowfall over the past 72 hours with a 100 centimeter base. Nikiska received 15 centimeters with a 97 centimeter base. Sunshine Village saw 22 centimeters of fresh powder over the past 72 hours with a 185 centimeter base. 24 centimeters of new snow for Lake Louise with a 137 centimeter base. At Mount Norquay, 17 centimeters of snow has fallen over the past 72 hours, leaving them with a 120 centimeter base. In BC, Panorama has seen 18 centimeters of the white stuff and they have an 82 centimeter base. Fernie saw 30 centimeters of fresh powder with an 85 centimeter base, and Kimberley received 11 centimeters of snow with an 85 centimeter base. And that's a look at your Bridge City News Ski Report.
Canada lost 4.5 times more jobs last month than anticipated. That pushed the unemployment rate from 8.8 to 9.4%. Stats Canada says employment fell by almost 213,000 jobs in January, wiping out gains made in the fall. Economists were expecting the loss of around 47,500 jobs. Most of the losses were felt in Ontario and Quebec, along with the retail sector, which has been hit hard during the lockdowns. Stats Canada says last month's employment figures showed the challenge of balancing economic activity with the need to protect public health. Skip the Dishes is charging BC customers a new fee as the food delivery company pushes back against a provincial order capping its commissions. The Winnipeg-based company says users of its app in BC will be charged 99 cents per order. The company says it wants to ensure service is not impacted by capping commissions on food delivery at 15%. The cap is meant to help restaurants cope with the pandemic, and food delivery commissions they pay can be as high as 30%. Skip the Dishes says this is the first time it has ever implemented a service fee for orders placed on its app. Indigo Books and Music says its net profit grew nearly 19% in its latest quarter, despite facing the impact from forced closures. The Toronto-based retailer reported a third quarter profit of $30.7 million for the 3 months ending December 26th. Revenue, however, was down 5% to $365.4 million. The consulting firm McKinsey & Company has agreed to pay nearly $600 million for its role in the current opioid crisis. The deal announced is interesting because McKinsey did not make or sell the powerful painkillers.
We know the opioid epidemic is one of the most devastating crises of our time. The rise in opioid prescriptions caused an equally devastating rise in substance use disorder, overdoses, and deaths. We continue to see it every day in our communities. But today, a coalition of 53 attorneys general representing 47 states, the District of Columbia, and 5 U.S. territories together announce a $570 million settlement with one of the world's largest consulting firms, McKinsey & Company. Through a project McKinsey referred to as, quote, turbocharging the sales engine, McKinsey told Purdue and the Sacklers how to sell more OxyContin. This agreement with McKinsey is the first multi-state opioid settlement to result in substantial payment to the states to address this epidemic.
Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 93 points on the day to finish at 18,136. The Dow was up 92 points to 31,148. The S&P 500 was up 15 points to 3887, and the Nasdaq was up 78 points to 13,856. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up 85 cents to 57.08 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 5 cents to 2.88 US. Gold was up $20.08 to 18.1411 US an ounce, and silver was up 57 cents to 26.92 US an ounce. Wheat is at $304 per metric ton, barley's at $307, canola's at $6.92, and corn is at $342 per metric ton. Live cattle were up 28 cents to 116.73. Feeder cattle were down $1.23 to 138.28, and lean hogs were down 5 cents to 70.98. The Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours to 78.36 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, as part of the province's Phase 1 Path Forward relaunch on February the 8th, the City of Lethbridge will be keeping all recreation and culture facilities closed for now. That will include all public pools and arenas. Starting Monday, one-on-one training will be allowed, however, in places like the ATB Centre and the NMAX Centre. Coming up, a one-on-one interview with Lethbridge MP Rachel Harder, who will talk to us about COVID-19 vaccine rollouts in Alberta and whether or not she thinks we'll have an election this spring. That Q&A is on deck. As you've heard on Bridge City News, the cancellation of the Keystone XL pipeline expansion means around 1,000 Albertans have lost their jobs. Newly elected U.S. President Joe Biden revoked the presidential permit for the project. Now, to talk about this as a big supporter of our energy sector, Lethbridge MP Rachel Harder joining us from Ottawa. Rachel, how devastating is this for Alberta and the Canadian economies in general?
Yeah, Hal, thank you so much for the question. It is absolutely devastating. I mean, at the end of the day, we're talking about people. We're talking about their livelihoods. We're talking about their talent, their energy, their gifts, their abilities being invested into a sector that has traditionally held Canada in a very high standard. Look, gas, energy, it's the largest contributor to our national GDP. It's extremely important for national unity. And not to mention, it's the fuel of life. It's what keeps us ticking. It's what allows us to do the things that we love to do day to day. And so for the Prime Minister not to go to bat for this industry and in particular for this project is absolutely shameful.
Now, you're in Ottawa. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau spoke with U.S. President Joe Biden. Did our PM put any pressure on Biden whatsoever? And is there any way the Keystone XL can still be saved?
Hal, unfortunately, our Prime Minister did not raise this with Biden. It's so devastating. The Prime Minister had an opportunity to call the president when he was the president-elect. Prime Minister Trudeau did not take advantage of that opportunity. And then when Trudeau did formally talk to President Biden, this didn't even make it into the phone conversation. It's absolutely devastating. And look, at the end of the day, I think what this shows is just how much this Prime Minister favors Eastern Canada over Western Canada. And again, it's to the detriment of hardworking Canadians who are, just wanting to keep our economy afloat and contribute to the society that we love.
Do you think maybe people in central Canada will start caring a little bit more about Alberta oil when they can't heat their homes anymore with natural gas? They can't put gasoline into their cars. I mean, people need oil, plus to build plastics, building roads. Oil is incorporated in so much into our economy.
Yeah, and that's just it. I mean, everything from the toothbrushes we use to the glasses we wear to the shoes we have on our feet to the homes we live in, oil is a part of our society and it's not going anywhere. The research actually shows that our need for energy is only going to increase in the years to come. This is where Canada has a huge opportunity to contribute positively. Look, if we don't develop this industry here within our own country, it forces us into a position where we have to take oil and gas from places like Saudi Arabia, where there are no environmental regulations, no human rights respects are low. Why would we do that? Why would we invest in unethical oil when we can develop the industry right here in our own country and do it in a really great way?
Do you think maybe the reason why Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is not in support of Alberta's oil, because specifically he's getting pressure from the environmental groups and the NDP propping up the minority government right now, the Green Party doing the same thing? Is that why? Because of the support he's getting?
I think Trudeau is someone who functions very much with his own ideologies and, certainly has his own interests. Unfortunately, those interests don't always align with what's in the greatest interest of Canadians as a whole. And I think that's really sad. I think Canadians deserve a Prime Minister who is going to fight for a unified Canada, which means every single province and the needs of every single region should be contended for by the Prime Minister. Canadians deserve that.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has been talking about a great reset for our local economy. And Rachel, that's made a lot of Canadians quite nervous. From what you've heard and seen on the Hill, what would that great reset actually look like?
Yeah, certainly Trudeau has talked a lot about resetting the economy, re-envisioning Canada, moving forward, rebuilding. Canada is not a country that needs to be reset or rebuilt. We live in the best country in the world. We have phenomenal people with extremely fabulous talent and ability and gifts. These are the individuals who should be invited to the table to be a part of the solution, to be a part of solving the problems that we face. we shouldn't have a prime minister who is dictating to us what our needs are and what the solutions are. Canadians as a whole should be included in that process. And unfortunately, Trudeau is not doing that. Instead, he's choosing to be dictatorial in his leadership rather than inclusive. And quite frankly, it's an abomination to democracy.
Now, what are you hearing in Ottawa, Rachel, with the potential of a spring election? Could we be going to the polls the next few months? The Prime Minister has repeatedly said he wants a majority government.
Yeah, I think it's very likely. The Prime Minister has definitely made it very clear that he wants a majority. In addition to that, we know from other events that the Prime Minister will certainly do whatever is in his best interest. Look, Hal, at the end of the day, as Conservatives, we certainly don't want an election. We know that Canadians don't want to go into an election right now. Definitely not in the middle of a pandemic. I mean, people are focused on their livelihoods, they're focused on their families, they're focused on their health, they're focused on their loved ones. That's where our Prime Minister should also be putting his focus. And instead, it looks like he's positioning himself to take advantage of Canadians during a vulnerable time. It's shameful.
Do you feel as well that perhaps the reason why the Conservative Party of Canada doesn't want to go into an election is because you want to give Canadians more time to get to know your leader, Erin O'Toole?
Certainly, we want Canadians to get to know Erin O'Toole, and we want them to become familiar with our platform. We believe that we have a lot to offer, and certainly there's space within the big blue tent for many, many, many Canadians. And so we want to invite them in, and we want them to be a part of our family. In addition to that, we want them to be well looked after, and we want the election to take place during a time when Canadians are going to be cared for, when their safety is not going to be put at risk. They deserve that.
You know, many people are very concerned that the vaccine rollout is taking forever thanks to delays from companies like Pfizer, BioNTech, Moderna. Was this poor planning on behalf of the Trudeau Liberals, or was it really out of their hands?
There's no doubt about it. This was due to poor planning from the current government. Unfortunately, they decided to put all of their eggs in one basket, and they failed to secure the type of contracts that they needed. And so as a result, Canadians are left on the hook. They're the ones that are feeling the repercussions of the inaction from the current government. When I look at a country like Israel, they knew what they were doing. They signed the right contracts, they fought for their people. And as a result, Israel is receiving vaccinations on time and able to roll them out in an effective and efficient manner. They will have about 70% of their population vaccinated by spring. That's incredible. All that took was leadership. It took leadership with vision. It took leadership that actually cared about the people. That's what we need in this country too.
Now, Prime Minister Trudeau also talked about the Made in Canada solution with the Novavax and the plant in Montreal, so we can have vaccines manufactured right here in Canada. But why did it take so long?
Hell, I don't know. Again, I would just point to inaction and disinterest in our nation as a whole and in the well-being of Canadians. Sad.
Now, let's talk a bit about politics behind the scenes. Now, Derek Sloan, a social conservative, was recently kicked out of the caucus by Tory leader Erin O'Toole. Many people view O'Toole as a red Tory, and maybe not even a true conservative. Are you concerned that you or maybe Leslie Lewis may be next? I mean, you're both social conservatives as well.
Not at all, Hal. I'm not worried. Erin O'Toole has made it really clear that there is a spot for us in the party, and I'm really proud to serve under his leadership. He's made it also clear that there's this space to be diverse. We celebrate diversity of thought, diversity of belief, diversity of ethnicity, etc. And so there is space within the conservative movement for individuals from a different background with different beliefs. Ultimately, we have an opportunity here as the Conservative Party of Canada to welcome Canadians in from coast to coast and from all sorts of backgrounds. After all, isn't that what it is to be Canadian? We're a pluralistic country. We believe in multiculturalism. Shouldn't we be celebrating true diversity?
Now, the Conservatives are not in power, but are the official opposition. Tell me about some of the challenges you face to try and get federal help for people in Lethbridge, whether it's maybe combating the drug crisis or helping small businesses throughout this pandemic here.
Yeah, Hal, I appreciate the question. I think there are many challenges that we face, and certainly as a member of the opposition, our task at hand is to join forces with other parties in the House in order to garner their support to bring forward movements, legislation, etc., that we believe is in the benefit of the Canadian public. It's great when other parties are on board and we're able to move something forward. That that is cause for celebration, and those moments, of course, are really fabulous. At the same time, however, there are times when, as Conservative members, we fight for something, and unfortunately, we're not able to get it through because we don't have the support of other opposition parties. That said, as the Conservative member for Lethbridge, as the local representative, it's always my pleasure to bring an issue forward and to contend for it. And at the end of the day, I'll continue to work to my greatest ability to join forces with other parties and to garner their support and hopefully to move forward initiatives that are going to be beneficial to my constituents, but to Canada as a whole.
So more specifically, Rachel, what do you think are some of the biggest issues facing people here in Southwestern Alberta as we're rolling into 2021 right now? We're already in February.
Yeah, certainly one of the biggest concerns that I'm hearing is definitely from local business owners. They've had to shut their doors or take severe measures that have resulted in cutbacks. And I think for so many in the Lethbridge region, they own and operate their businesses as a family. And so it's a family-run business in most cases. And then on top of that, those that they employ, they treat like family. And so to have to let them go or to have to close their doors is it's so devastating for them on many levels, not only their livelihood, but also because they have that heart connection with those that they employ, they find it extremely difficult. So as the Member of Parliament, I definitely hear this as the number one concern.
Let's chat a bit now about Bill C6, the conversion therapy ban bill. Are there any new provisions in the bill allowing those who want to seek counseling to still receive it?
This bill is certainly not as clear as I would like it to be. The definition around conversion therapy just has not been given in the way that Canadians would desire. At committee, we've heard from a countless number of witnesses who have said the same. And so as a result, I am very concerned about what this bill would mean, not only for those individuals who would wish to speak to a counselor, but also for those who are practitioners in the medical field, parents, as well as school counselors, as well as faith leaders. They're having to move forward and function in a capacity where they're interacting with young people on a day-to-day basis. They're often sought out for counsel, for words of help, and they're left wondering what can they say and what can't they say. And so that's a really scary place for many of them to find themselves. It would really just take a very small tweak, and that is just a concrete definition.
I recently chatted with Alex Schadenberg from Euthanasia Prevention Coalition, and he's really concerned about the Liberals' new medically assistance in dying bill, C7, which would allow someone to take their own life within a 24-hour period. Rachel, what are some of your big concerns with this bill?
Hal, my number one concern is the speed at which this bill was pushed through. It just seemed like the Liberals had an agenda and they wanted to push it through and they weren't really willing to listen to witness testimony. Again, we heard from countless witnesses who raised concerns with this piece of legislation. And, we heard from people who have a disability and they said, look, we've actually already experienced pressure from physicians to consider euthanasia. Imagine what would happen if the parameters are loosened even further. And so there were many, many, many individuals who were calling for safeguards to be kept in place. Unfortunately, the Liberals turned a deaf ear to those individuals who were able to give us that firsthand account, that testimony. And the Liberals decided to push it through. I think as a result, it continues to keep those who are already vulnerable within our Canadian society. It keeps them in a place of even greater vulnerability. And I think that's very, very sad. As a country, we should want to look after those who need our care the most.
Let's talk about the popularity of your party right now, the Conservative Party of Canada. Very popular in the prairies, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, but you still need to make serious inroads where a lot of the votes are located in central Canada, in Quebec and Ontario. What is it going to take to break through those barriers?
Well, Hal, I think we need to show Canadians that we're fighting for them. And I think fighting for them effectively starts by listening to them. And so right now, our leader, Aaron O'Toole, is taking the time to do a cross-country tour where he's hosting town halls. He's listening to Canadians. He's hearing what matters most to them. And then he's coming and meeting with us as a caucus. And together we're putting forward strategy on how we best fight for them. I think Canadians deserve that. They deserve to have a voice. They deserve to be included in the democratic process. And unfortunately, under the current leader, they just haven't been afforded that opportunity. We'd like to give them that.
Lethbridge Conservative MP Rachel Harder, thanks for joining me today from Ottawa. Stay safe and warm.
Thanks, Hal. You too.
The Bible is the best-selling book of all time, but many today doubt its authenticity and reliability. Can we trust what it says is actually from God, and is the text we read today the same as it was thousands of years ago? Joining us today to discuss this further is Dr. Craig Evans, a distinguished professor of Christian origin at Houston Baptist University and author of Jesus and the Manuscripts, What We Can Learn from the Oldest Texts. He joins me via Skype from Houston. Hello, Dr. Evans. Thanks for joining me today.
Oh, you're very welcome. Good to be with you.
Now, Dr. Evans, how reliable are the ancient manuscripts, and can we trust the authenticity of the New Testament?
Well, they're very reliable, and I say that because it isn't a faith statement, or it isn't a preference or a wish. It's because we have a huge amount of evidence. We have hundreds of very old manuscripts that get very close to the time when the original writings were written. And then, of course, we have thousands, if you count it, right on in through the Middle Ages. And what this means is, it isn't just the sheer number of it. It's because you can put these texts side by side and compare their readings. Because, yes, scribes do make mistakes. They're writing it out by hand. There's no printing press. There is no computer. There is no spell checker. And so when a scribe is writing by hand, letter by letter, word by word, sometimes the scribe makes a mistake. But the same scribes or different scribes don't make the same mistakes. And so you take these multiple copies and put them side by side, and we can figure out, oops, there's a mistake here, and we can reestablish without that much difficulty what the original text read. And so there are other reasons, other factors, but here's just one I'll mention. What about the reliability of the Gospels? For example, if you say, okay, the text has been preserved, okay, we know what Matthew, Mark, Luke, John originally wrote, but did they write the truth? Were they telling us what the historical Jesus really said and did, or are they just making up stories about him? Well, for me, the bottom line is archaeology. And I know plenty of archaeologists. I've done archaeological work in Israel myself. And if the Gospels were fanciful, if they were fiction, then they wouldn't be of any use for an archaeologist. But archaeologists, some of them are not Christians. Some of them don't necessarily believe in God, but they make use of Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and the book of Acts all the time when they're digging in Israel, because they have found them to be a reliable guide. And that, to me, is a real indicator. Because archaeology is expensive, it's time consuming, it takes a lot of manpower. You have a lot of skin in the game, and you don't want to dig in the wrong place or not find anything or dig up stuff you don't even know what it is. So you want reliable sources, and all of the archaeologists concerned with the first century in Israel use Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and the book of Acts. That says a lot.
That's absolutely fascinating, and I did not know that, so thank you for sharing. Now, your book deals with the oldest manuscripts inside and outside of the Bible. What kind of non-biblical manuscript evidence is there to verify what the Bible says?
Well, there are Roman historians that talk about the early Christian movement. There are 2 or 3 historians in the 2nd century. They know where Christianity came from. They link it to Jesus. They know what the basic story is. Jesus is a Jewish teacher. He had a reputation of being a healer, and then things turned against him. He was put to death by Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor. And then Christians believed he'd been raised from the dead. And in fact, that story of Jesus being raised from the dead so impacted the Roman Empire that novelists began incorporating that theme in some of their stories. A lot of people don't know that. Finding the tomb empty and wondering, what happened to my relative? Anyway, Christianity had a very great impact early on. And so you have historians talking about Jesus, the early Christians, talking about Nero and how he persecuted Christians in the middle of the first century. So there's plenty of literary evidence and historical evidence, not just archaeological evidence, that shows that the gospel writers are telling the truth. They know what they're talking about.
All right, so what are the oldest manuscripts in existence today, and how close in time are these to the originals, and how does that compare with other ancient manuscripts?
Well, we have at least 10, maybe 12 fragments of the New Testament that reach back to the 2nd century, which makes them within about 100 years, give or take a decade or two. That's a very early attestation. There are very few manuscripts from antiquity where we have copies that close to when the originals were written. But the other thing is, if you get about 150 to 200 years from the New Testament, you have the whole thing. And we have multitude copies. I mentioned that earlier. That's where we can compare them and we can confirm that, yep, we have the text. But you compare that to other writings, Tacitus, Herodias, some of these great historians from the past, well, never mind Plato and Aristotle, and it might be 1,000 years or 8 or 9 centuries from the time they wrote to our oldest manuscript that we have. And we might only have 5 or 6 manuscripts, maybe 10, whereas we have hundreds of very old ones for the New Testament and thousands that predate the printing press. So the New Testament record compares very favorably to the classical record.
Right. Now, you refer to the oldest witnesses to the life of Jesus. What are these, and are they trustworthy?
Well, the oldest witnesses to Jesus are the first century Gospels. These are the only Gospels we have from the first century. Nothing else is turned up that's that old. So we have Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. And the church, I think, was very wise to say, let's go with the oldest ones. These were written when eyewitnesses were still living, when some of the apostles were still living. Yes, there were other gospels written in the 2nd century. My book talks about them, like the Gospel of Thomas or the Gospel of Peter or the Gospel of Mary. And they're interesting writings, and they should be taken seriously and studied, but they're from a later time, and they do different things. Their purpose for being written was very different. To have Jesus teach new ideas, mysterious teachings, and so on, like Gnosticism and that kind of thing. And so I think the evidence is pretty clear. Now, by the way, the Gospel of Peter is interested in trying to defend the resurrection way beyond what the first century Gospels do. So everybody's at the tomb. Everybody sees the stone roll aside and Jesus emerge. I mean, it's quite a story, but that's in the 2nd century. And what I like about that, it shows how sober and restrained the earlier Gospels, the canonical Gospels, are. They aren't telling fanciful stories. You don't have Jesus described who's real tall and his head reaches all the way to the clouds. You have a very sober, restrained telling, which I think is historical, and it reflects what actually happened compared to later fictional accounts that are told for dramatic effect.
Interesting. Now, you mentioned the Gospel of Peter. Now, can you tell us a bit about this so-called 5th Gospel, the Gospel of Peter? Why is it called the Cross Gospel, and why wasn't it included?
Well, yeah, I'm really glad it wasn't included. Can you imagine trying to argue in its defense? I just referred to it. It's the one where Jesus's head is real tall, but they call it the Cross Gospel because when Jesus is helped out of the tomb by 2 real tall angels, or what I call the NBA Dream Team, when they come out of the tomb, the cross comes out following Jesus. The cross. What was it doing in the tomb with him? And this reflects a fanciful 2nd century tradition. It has nothing to do with history, but it had to do with the tradition that developed in the 2nd century that wherever Jesus goes, his cross goes with him. And by the way, in the Gospel of Peter, the heavenly voice speaks and says, have you preached to those who are dead or to them that sleep? Jesus doesn't answer the question. The cross does. The cross says yes, and so the cross can not only walk, it can talk. Well, that's the stuff of fiction. And that's why I think it's important. That's what fictional stuff sounds like, in contrast to the earlier, more sober and restrained accounts that we have in the New Testament.
So why do you think it wasn't included?
Well, for one thing, it was written much later. The Gospel of Peter with the walking, talking cross probably wasn't written until about 140 AD. And so Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were already circulating and well known and had been regarded for a generation or more as authoritative. And so these later Gospels come along. I don't think these later Gospels come along to compete with the earlier Gospels, and certainly not to try to replace them, but I think they come along to augment them, to sort of say, oh, okay, we all know that story. Here's something special, like the Gospel of Thomas does that. The Gospel of Thomas claims to have the secret words of Jesus. We all know the public words. They're in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Here are the secret words that only the privileged can have. And so I think that's what some of these later Gospels do.
So what became of that Gospel of Thomas, and why was it not part of the New Testament?
Same reason. The Gospel of Thomas was late. In fact, I think it didn't get written until 100 years after the other Gospels. And we're lucky that it survives. We had found among the papyri at Oxyrhynchus, Egypt, where thousands and thousands of papyri fragments, Christian, biblical, but also mostly secular fragments were found. We had 3 fragments of the Gospel of Thomas. We didn't even know the fragments belonged together. But after World War II, in the Coptic language, the Egyptian language using the Greek alphabet, we actually found some books, and Thomas Complete was in it in Coptic translation. These books were prestige items. They were usually put in graves, and that's why they were so well preserved. They were protected. They were buried. They were in a cave or whatever. The Gospel of Judas came from a cave, a burial cave, and that's why we were able to find them later. But I don't think they were ever written with the idea of being in the Bible.
Interesting. Now, every so often we hear about scholars suggesting that there's evidence that Jesus was married. What does this evidence tell us?
Well, first of all, I don't think anybody in antiquity thought Jesus was married. And it wouldn't have been scandalous either, by the way, even for a prophet or messianic claimant to have a wife. That would have been perfectly normal in Israel at that time. But Jesus has no wife, never does, and church fathers mention that. And it's not because they're trying to argue, oh, it's profoundly theological. It's just a fact. Well, there are 2 documents, maybe 3, from the 2nd or 3rd century that talk about Jesus loving Mary Magdalene. She was a privileged disciple. He loved her. He even kissed her, according to one of these Gospels. Well, don't forget, Judas Iscariot kissed Jesus too. Don't forget, Jesus in the Gospel of John says he loves his male disciples. So we shouldn't take our modern idea of the word love or kiss and read that back into antiquity with our meanings, because people kissed other people and showed their affection. We shake hands, we hug people, but usually we don't kiss people unless it's really close, immediate family or spouses or whatever. And so there is no evidence from antiquity that Jesus and Mary were romantically involved. And then this text called the Gospel of Jesus' Wife that came out a few years ago and embarrassed a professor from Harvard who published it. It's a modern hoax. So there simply is no evidence whatsoever that Jesus had a wife or a girlfriend or anything like that.
Now, Dr. Evans, really quickly, because we're almost out of time, what would you say to viewers who have doubts that the Bible exists? Like, why do you believe that we can trust the Bible completely?
Well, we can trust the Bible because for everything I've been talking about, we have very old manuscripts. So it's not like somebody found it in the cave 100 years ago. It's been around for a long time, and we have very, very old copies and fragments and pieces, and we keep finding them as we sift through the papyri. But the other thing I mentioned earlier in our interview, It's the archaeological confirmation. If the Bible was a fairy tale and was talking about somebody who didn't exist or things that didn't happen, things that never occurred, well, then why would archaeologists find these Gospels so useful, so accurate, so that they rely on them? They know where to dig. They know how to understand what they dig up. And they turn to the Bible. I've been there. I've been in the holes. I've dug up things. And I hear the archaeologists, including Jewish archaeologists, who are not Christians, by the way, and they'll say, oh, well, we know what this means because of what it says in Matthew. Well, that says a lot.
Interesting. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Evans. Dr. Craig Evans is the author of Jesus and the Manuscripts, What We Can Learn from the Oldest Texts. Thank you so much for joining me today.
You're very welcome.
I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.